Good morning everybody, welcome to this week's Tullis Turf Talk. Fantastic conditions outside for things to start germinating, to start growing, so all the new turf crops coming along beautifully, all the fields we looked at a couple of weeks ago during germination now all flying. So obviously grass is a living thing, it's a living individual plant, but so are lots of others. So this week we're going to have a look at sort of some common weeds that you might find in turf, more in established lawns, and certainly not in the turf that you're buying from us. So I just want to go through it really, and I guess the question number one is, are they weeds or are they wildflowers? Well, that's entirely up to you to decide. If you really wanted sort of wildflowers in your garden, then you might choose to maybe put part of your garden down to wildflowers, so something like our wildflower turf, absolutely ideal option to a standard sort of lawn turf. So we're going to have a look through them, we're going to have a look at some ways to identify them, one or two ways or sort of situations where you may find them, because some will be certainly site specific in some way. So we'll start off at the far end here. So here doesn't need any introduction at all really, and this is obviously a daisy. So again, quite a common weed found in sort of most sort of established lawns, or wildflower, depending on what you want to call it of course. So the next one we look at is obviously the dandelion. Again, another very common one. Again, I think really a really nice sort of yellow flower, and who as a kid didn't sort of get the seed heads and give them a blow? That one's just about done. So obviously very small seeds on the stem here, obviously can travel for miles, so very widespread, very common weed, particularly in turf. Moving on from there, we'll look at some of the sort of lower level sort of growing weeds. So here we've got things like the white clover. You can see the flower here. You can get sort of red clovers in there as well. The white clover is a very common one. It's quite an invasive weed, so you tend to find if you've got clover in your lawn, you may have quite a big patch of it. But again, coming down to sort of wildflowers and standard sort of grass turf, fantastic plant for bees. So if you want to do a bit for your bees, but you really want a nice lawn too, then maybe consider leaving a corner somewhere and sort of controlling its invasion. But we'll talk about that a bit more in a little while. Another low grown one, another quite common one that people struggle to identify, is this one. So again, superficially quite similar to a clover. This one here is called a couple of names really. It can be called yellow suckling clover, or it can be called lesser trefoil. So again, this is one that you'll see quite widespread in the lawn in quite big patches. Very small flower plant on there, but quite invasive, and you can see there from the density of it that the grass sward is really going to struggle to outcompete it. So moving on from there, we've got another low level one. Here we have a bit of chickweed. Again, this is an annual plant, so it does come and go. This one here you can quite often sort of dig out quite easily. It's quite sort of easily controllable in that way. So not massively common, certainly not as common as the previous four in lawns, but certainly one to keep an eye out for. The next one we're going to look at here, this one is Achillea, or called the English name yarrow. Lovely white flower head. You can identify it's got some really sort of feathery leaves, so you can run your finger up them, really soft to touch, soft to feel. And this is a plant that you'll often find in sort of very dry situations. So you may see this sort of on a sort of more sandy location, or a really free draining soil. Very common on golf courses, sort of on bunker faces where you get sand splash, therefore you get a very dry environment. That's where it tends to thrive. If you have a very wet lawn, so say your lawn is on say a very heavy sort of clay based soil, then the two here are two that you may commonly find sort of within. So the first one is this one. This is greater plantain. As you can see, very large leaves, really going to look quite ugly on a nice lawn. Generally associated with wet patches, you know, wetter lawns, but obviously can be found anywhere. So quite a big leaf, quite a difficult one to control. I find with these, if you can get them at an early stage, again you can dig them out quite well and control them that way. But when they get to this kind of stage and you really don't want them in your lawn, then you're going to be looking at an intervention. And the final one I want to look at is a good old-fashioned buttercup. This one here is Ranunculus reapens, which is a creeping buttercup. Again, quite a highly invasive one, particularly on a wet area. So what will happen is each plant will grow, it'll then create stolons, and we'll get further plants until it spreads quite a big area. So some of you may remember back as a kid, it used to be the best way to find out whether you like butter or not. So you used to put the buttercup plant under your chin, and if your chin turned yellow, then you like butter. Bit of an old wives' tale, but hey ho, why not tell it? So that's an introduction to a few sort of common weeds in turf. So we've got lots of things to think about really. Number one is when we grow our standard sort of grass turf at tillers, obviously we want to send out a nice clean sward, you know, a beautiful nice new green lawn. Again, we know the environmental benefits of that alone. Fantastic product to have in your garden for its oxygen, for its carbon intake, and just for general feeling good. If you're not too fussy, then if you've got these things in your existing lawn, then feel free to leave them. Fantastic, like I said earlier, for the pollinators, particularly the clover for the bees. They're not all bad. In fact, when the video's finished, I've actually taken this little sample of weeds from an area away from the turf, and I'll be going straight back and I'll be planting them back in the ground. Because they're in an area that's not a problem, we don't need to keep it clean, I'm going to put them back there so the wildlife can benefit. So it's really just to give you a chance to have a look at them, and we can identify a few of them for you. Now, other ways of control, obviously there's the use of sort of plant pesticide products. So certainly here at tillers, if we allow our fields to become contaminated with weeds, the weed is going to outcompete the grass, therefore we're not going to have a grass product or a turf to sell you or to distribute. So we have to control it in a responsible manner. So obviously we only use products that are specified for the job, and we'll only ever go out there if absolutely necessary. So I would say the same thing in your garden. If you can and you really don't want a weed in there, or a wildflower, depending on how you see it, then if you can, simply grub it out. Or if you do feel you have to use a sort of a herbicide on it, then if there's not too many, just go and spot tree them. Rather than spray the whole lawn, just spot treat individual plants themselves. So what I would say is, if you do decide to spray your lawn and you really don't want these weeds or wildflowers, as I like to call them, in there, and I would suggest perhaps getting a contractor in to do it. If you do that, remember to make sure they've got all the relevant licenses, all the relevant insurance to do the job, and they're qualified and competent. So, you know, it's your lawn you're protecting, so it's well worth taking those steps to make sure that's covered. So I hope that's given you a bit of an introduction into a few sort of weed species here that you may find in an existing lawn. You certainly won't find them in the turf we send out, but like I said, it's up to you whether you want to leave them or not leave them. So just to finish off, I hope that's given you a bit of an insight and hopefully help you with a few identifications in your own sort of lawns and how you may sort of deal with them. So thanks again for watching. If you like it, remember to like, to retweet, to share it, tell your friends, subscribe to the channel, and we look forward to catching up with you again next week. Thanks everybody.